So recently, with a lot of guys getting out of prison early, there's a guy named Paul Buford, who's one of the few remaining BMF guys is still in prison, trying to get out early. And his name is interesting because the feds have tried to say that he's somebody that proves a linkage between BMF and Bad Boy records. Now, back in 1993, Puff Daddy was coming off a string of very successful projects, most notably Mary J. Blige's What's the 411. He was second in command at Uptown Records to Andre Harrell, rest in peace, a very important guy for moving hip-hop into the pop culture. And while Puffy went and got a deal at Arista, there was some question as to where he got the money for the amazing marketing campaigns, which is what he did for Biggie and Craig Mack. And there's people trying to say that it was BMF money. But let's go back to 1993. BMF is only a couple years out of Detroit. Why would they have had the money to support Puffy at that time? Maybe they could have, but there's no concrete evidence of that. And people like to take different pieces of, well, it's not evidence. They're different anecdotes spread across time and space and put them together and act like they're evidence. And so Fleming Daniels is somebody who was said to be the BMF third in command, whatever that means. He got a lot of time in the BMF initial indictment. He's currently in Georgia State Prison for a different violent crime. And he's from Brooklyn, which is where Biggie's from. So on paper, you could think, well, he's from Brooklyn and Biggie's from Brooklyn, and there's pictures of Puffy and Big Meech and T together, but Brooklyn alone is almost as big as Chicago. This is because Biggie is from Brooklyn in his early 20s doesn't mean he knew Fleming Daniels, and there's no evidence that Fleming Daniels even was down with Meech and T in 1993. So I think that's kind of a dead end. Now, there's another guy, Daryl Papa Taylor, who's Puffy's first cousin. And Daryl Papa Taylor was one of the guys who got on the stand in one of the BMF cases and said he received kilos, I think from Big Meech personally, and he drove kilos, hundreds of kilos of cocaine all around the country. And I think in exchange for his testimony, he got his 10-year sentence knocked down to 7 years. That doesn't sound like much of a deal to me, but and he's definitely Puffy's first cousin, and he did testify that he was introduced to BMF via Paul Buford, the BMF guy I referenced at the beginning. And Paul Buford was a guy who worked as a BMF security person, and when BMF got indicted, he went and worked for Puffy as security, and then he went on a run, and he was wanted for several years, and he's still in prison. He's one of the few BMF guys that's still in prison. He worked both as Puffy security and BMF security, and Daryl Papa Taylor, Puffy's first cousin, said that he was introduced to BMF by Puffy. But so what? They're all at the same parties. People are introducing each other to each other. Doesn't mean Puffy knew what he was going to do. I mean, maybe Daryl Papa Taylor was the cousin that couldn't figure out how to get himself any money off of Bad Boy Records, which was gigantic, so Puffy was trying to pawn him off on somebody else. That's just a guess on my part. I don't know. Now remember, law enforcement is just like mobsters or Black Street guys who get out of prison. Like, you know, people want to get paid off of these interesting stories that they have, that all this hard work they put in on the streets or as a law enforcement officer, and they're watching Power or The Godfather or something, and they're thinking, hey, my stories are better than that. So law enforcement guys or women that are trying to get movie deals, they might know that there's all these famous people that are tangentially connected to either BMF or Bad Boy, and they try to put them together and conjure up coherent stories. It doesn't mean they're true, though it doesn't mean they're untrue either, but I'm pretty sure if there was some real smoking gun evidence of all this stuff, they'd be bringing people into court, or they'd be writing books, at least. So if the stuff was past the statute of limitations, there'd be books about Puffy and BMF, and because when you sell a book, you can talk about something obviously that's past the statute of limitations, but the book companies are subject to get sued, so they make you go through a process of, basically they have a lawyer play devil's advocate and see could you get through the libel process, right? You can say anything about anybody as long as it's true. So if a lot of these rumors and innuendo that are being floated about the connection between Puffy and Bad Boy were true, there'd at least be a book, and it must not have passed muster through any of the big publishing houses' legal teams, and they're afraid of a libel lawsuit. So it's very interesting to think about Bad Boy Records being founded by BMF money, and Daryl Papa Taylor, Fleming Ill Daniels, and Paul Buford are all points of tangency that definitely interacted with both groups, with Big Meech, with Puffy, but it doesn't mean there was anything criminal going on. And remember, the air at the top is thin. There's only so many people that make a lot of money, and then when you start talking about, you know, young black males under the age of 35 who are making a lot of money and they're hanging out partying and they have companies and, you know, they're CEOs and businessmen and telling people what to do. I mean, there's not that many people in the whole United States doing that. So of course Puffy and Meech and Southwest T hung out together and took pictures together. It doesn't mean they committed any crimes together, or that Bad Boy, when they got their deal from Arista and when Puffy left Andre Harrell, did anything criminal, because if they did, I think they would have been charged, or there would at least be a book deal. But it's definitely interesting to think about, and it shows you that power moves with power. That's your lesson for today, American Dope, Al Prophet. With the Terry Southwest T Flannery free from jail and 50 Cent's television series supposedly getting ready to go into production, going to be doing a series of little stories about not so much the criminal activities of BMF, which are already well documented, but interesting things about their impact on the cultural landscape from the early 2000s all the way up until now. Did you know that Kim Kardashian is tied in with the story of the BMF indictment? Well, if you didn't know, you're about to find out. July.
So we sitting at the table, we're talking and stuff like that, and Sugar's like, yeah, you know, man, I like y'all moving, man. I like how y'all doing it, man. All the brothers coming together and, just getting along and taking care of each other and all that. Man, he said, I want my movement to be like this, man. You know what I mean? He said, I made a lot of dumb mistakes in the past, man. A lot of dumb choices, man. You know, I used to do shit like, we go up in the club or whatever, and, we see some football players over in the corner. They might be popping bottles, doing their little thing or whatever. And I walk and I look at my crew and like, yo, y'all gonna let them niggas front on us like that? Fuck, man. It's our town, man. And he would have his cats set it off on these is, football players. Like, these is regular cats, these squares, and set it off on them, whatever, and that kind of behavior, he admitted that kind of behavior caused his trouble. And, he understood that he was in an extremely advantageous and unlikely position with, what Death Row had accomplished. So